What's the dumbest thing you've ever done? During my time in middle school, I discovered the thrill of shopping through the school's book fair. I spent all my savings and then proceeded to steal my sister's Christmas money to spend on useless junk, books I'd never read, and whatever my classmates wanted. Well, those classmates told their parents, who then went to my mom to tell her how sweet I was for buying them gifts. My mom then asked where I got the money, and I spilled. Mom raised us to be honest. A bit too honest. She grounded me for a solid month. No screens at all. My parents paid my sister back the money though. None of the stuff could be refunded, so the added anger and disappointment from my parents made it worse. I look back on that years later and now question if that was all worth it. Heck no. I lost 99% of that junk about a year later and never read any of those books. In exchange, I got grounded for 30 days and my sister held a grudge against me for a solid year afterwards. That punishment definitely set me straight though. My dad drove a stick shift Toyota truck and our driveway is on an incline and we lived in a semi-trafficked road. I think I was 13 and he had this pulley thing he used to park his car, the brake. Anyways, one day I was waiting for him in the car in the driveway and my dumbass was wondering what the pulley was and what it would do it. I lifted it. The car rolled back into the road and there was a car up the street. Stopped at the stop sign, pulled up, asked me if I'm okay. I managed to get the pulley back in and just ran inside my house to show my dad the car parked in the middle of the road with some people around confused as to what just happened. Luckily there was no one driving by at the time or else I probably would smashed into them. After that we got McDonald's. I decided to use up a small candle that was half burned that I didn't have any use for. I kept feeding the drippings back into the candle. Then when I ran out of wick, I created new wicks out of TP. All of this was done in a very weird, zoned out headspace. So when I eventually ended up with a tea candle that had turned into a puddle of flaming paraffin on a tea saucer, I suddenly snapped out of it enough to realize that I should move it to the sink before something bad happened. Unfortunately, I was still in space cadet mode enough that without thinking, I decided to turn on the faucet to snuff out the flames. Instantly I had a 6-inch white column of flame reaching 4 feet up to the bottom of my kitchen cabinets. All I can say is the quote from Richard Pryor, "When that fire hits your ass, it will sober your ass up." I became suddenly alert, and time practically stood still as I realized I was about to set my home on fire. Calculating that the nearest fire extinguisher was too far away to be of any immediate help, and settled on the decision that the best thing for me to do was just to keep the faucet on and blow on the flame, trying to keep as much of it away from the press board above until the fire ran out of fuel. Luckily, since there was so little of the candle left, that didn't take long. It covered everything that was in the sink in a fine layer of wax and soot, but otherwise came away unscathed. When I was about 11 or 12 we were hiking on a trail in Israel. This particular spot was pretty narrow and about 200 to 300 feet from a sheer drop into a low tide river. I reached for my water to grab a sip and while drinking dropped the cap. As the cap starts rolling towards the edge I try to grab it before it falls over and lose balance. I grabbed onto the side of the cliff with a mouth still full of water, being in total shock. My entire family was ahead of me and continuing to leisurely walk and all I could go was with a mouth still full. I must have been hanging there for 10 seconds. Miraculously, my aunt turned and spotted me and my dad comes running in to grab me, and just as his hands grabbed me my arms, my hands, already weak, slipped. There was literally not even 1 second between life and certain death for me. By far the dumbest thing I've ever done. That was the day I almost died for a bottle cap, lol. I applied hair removal cream meant for women on my balls. I can't tell you how much pain I was in. I was in the shower at a friend's house and I couldn't even ask for help. Hair caused a burning sensation. So I switched off everything and just lay in bed. I also dumbly sprayed myself with pepper spray. But that's another story for another time. I tried free climbing down a 20 feet rock wall towards the top of a mountain on Oahu with no climbing experience. Ended up falling right off of it, but there wasn't much space to land. So, I took an 80 feet tumble down the side of this mountain before I slammed into brush strong enough to stop me. Had to get airlifted off the mountain to a field where Flight for Life took me to the hospital with a broken wrist, broken humerus, shattered elbow, ruptured diaphragm, broken ribs, and a laceration on my spleen. I got lucky it wasn't my legs or head or neck. Worst part is, if I'd have been patient I could've taken the little trail down next to the rock face that I climbed. Back when I was a freshman in college, my room had a window that was positioned directly over an adjoining building's roof. There was barely more than a 2-foot drop, meaning that if one was so inclined, they could very easily make a creative exit from the dormitory. Needless to say, residents were informed that they would get into all sorts of trouble if they ever accepted the implied invitation for forbidden rooftop dancing, or whatever else, with threats of both expulsion and arrest having been made more than once. Even so, the morning after I'd attended a party in a nearby room, I found myself using that elevated avenue as I staged something of a heist. See, I had accidentally left my hat in that other room, and its denizens had already left for class. Since I had no other option, other than, waiting for an hour or two, I took it upon myself to see if they'd neglected to lock their window. I departed my own room, made my way across the roof, let myself in, and discovered that I couldn't find my errant headwear anywhere within the mess that was left over from the previous night. Worse still, as I was about to make my exit, I noticed that a police officer had started watching the dormitory from a parking garage across the street. I wound up waiting for about 15 minutes, again, in someone else's room, until the law enforcement official finally disappeared. Seizing the opportunity, I all but leapt out the window, darted across the roof, and threw myself back into my own dwelling, right as my roommate was returning. "What are you doing?" he asked me. Well, I helpfully explained. I forgot my hat at the party." In response, the young man simply pointed to the corner of my desk, where my hat was plainly visible. "Did you seriously just break into their room?" "Ugh, fine, yes, and I almost got caught," I replied. "There was a cop watching from the garage. I had to wait forever for him to leave, then sprint across the roof to get back." My roommate gave me the sort of look that's usually reserved for foul-smelling stains on the soles of one's shoes. "Why didn't you just go through the door? It's not like they lock from the outside." I didn't have a good response, so I just left. After all, I was late for class by that point. Had an exam, slept too long, and reached my exam room 15 to 20 minutes late. My uni has a re-exam timetable too, but you need to have a valid reason for it. So I faked being sick in my uni's clinic. They prescribed a test for me which costed me around $10 to $12. I paid and gave the prescription to examination office, who then allowed me to apply for the re-exam. A friend of mine also missed an exam because he slept too long. That dude went straight to the examination office and said I slept too long and missed the exam. Need to sit for the re-exam please, thanks. Apparently the examination office isn't strict about the re-exam rules and they'll allow anyone who applies for it. So basically I pissed into a cup and wasted $10 to $12 over nothing. I could've had a pizza in that money. I lived in Sri Lanka for a year a long time back. I'm English and was working in a school there. I lived in a house provided by the school, and it was on the bank of a river. Wide, a couple or a few hundred meters, I guess. Fast flowing. Brown. Lots of dense vegetation on the banks. Plenty of dead things floated down it. A person once. One night I was alone in the house. I was sat on the balcony, drinking and looking at the river. My friend from back home was coming to stay with me in a few weeks. This is pretty much what went through my drunken mind. Mike is going to say back quote, "Have you swum in that river?" I'll have to say back quote, "No, I haven't." I'd better go and swim in the river. Then I can say yes, I have. So I did. No one knew where I was. It was dark, I was drunk, I was naked, and in a fast flowing, polluted river. I swam about 20 meters out, then back, fighting the current the whole time. Obviously, I made it and was okay. Mike did ask, by the way. Let me start by saying I can't drive due to anxiety. It will become important. My long distance best friend invited me to her wedding. I'd be staying in their house during that time. I said yes, paid like $400. I didn't really have too much money, but it was my best friend and I wanted to meet her, so I asked my brother to take care of my puppy for about a week, and I head across the country. I show up and have a great time with them and their family/friends. It helped my depression/suicidal thoughts a lot, and I told her that. Here's the bad decision part. She asked me if I wanted to move in with them because they liked having me around and it was helping my depression, and I had really clicked with everyone. I said yes and just didn't take my return flight, which I couldn't get refunded, and started paying them $400 in rent every month. The plan was for me to stay there for maybe a year or two, build up funds, and get my own place near them, so I could stay close to everyone who made me feel like living. We talked about how, if things started not working out, I just need time to build up funds, but I have no problem going home. They knew I had a puppy, and they destroy things, so any damage she did I told them I would pay for, etc. I worked from home, so I just needed my work computer and my dog to get to me ASAP, and then we would go from there. As I said, I didn't have a lot of money, so they helped me overnight ship my work computer, which was like $200. I talked to my brother about taking care of the pup for another week or two until I could get her to me. He graciously said yes. She was about 5 or 6 months old, so she was a handful. Work computer arrives. Life is good for a bit. I talked to my parents, I lived with them before this, about how to get my dog here. Flying isn't an option, too expensive. So we find a service online that has people drive your stuff to you for a fee. Paid like $400 and they drove my dog down. Was like a 2 to 3 day drive. Life is good again for a little while. Eventually, she starts telling me that me being around all the time is adding stress to their marriage and they are trying to work that out. So I try to be on my best behavior and coop myself up in my room more often. All I have is my work computer, which I can't do anything on, and my Nintendo Switch, so it was boring. But hey, at least I had something. Eventually we started getting into arguments about food and cleanliness and dishes. Little things like that, and we had to have a couple heart-to-hearts about it, but she told me she didn't want me to go home. A few weeks later, she tells me that she needs me to move out because a family member needed to move in because they were having marital problems. Not hey, can you crash on the couch for a couple weeks while they use your room. It was hey, I need you out of here in a week. So I scrambled to find a way to get me and my dog home in a week when I have practically no money because I was still recovering. I can't fly because my dog is too big to be in the cabin and they need long notice and paperwork before they will take her as cargo, and I can't drive. My parents pulled through and drove 23 hours straight to come get me on the agreement that I would pay for it when I could because they don't have too much money either. I pack up what little stuff I have and my dog, and we drive back across the country another 23 hours. I held a lot of resentment towards my friend, but I tried to look at it from their perspective of a family member really needing help. But I didn't really speak to them for a week or so to get my head right. Eventually they messaged me asking for the rent that I owed them from the time I stayed there, and that didn't sit well with me. We both blew up on each other and argued about it. And I told her I would pay for the stuff my dog damaged, but I didn't think it was fair to pay the rent too, given the amount of time I was given to move out. In the mix of this, they told me it was really inconsiderate of you to have your family drive here to get you. Needless to say, that ended our friendship. We still talk from time to time, and we eventually apologize to each other, but it will never be the same. I don't know about them, but I still hold some resentment.